possibly look at increasing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, Ms. Plummer?
As you all know, my name is Renee Pine-Gaston, and I live at 321 West 4th Street. I'm here to speak to you about Bill number 2 to 2011. I have been in front of the zoning board several times because of the nonprofit which I had. I have found them to be caring, following the letter of the law, willing to give you the advice that you need to complete your project. Now, I think the only problem that I can see at the moment is that they need a woman on that zoning board. And I would say there are thousands of us in this city who are women, good-looking, educated, and willing to serve this community. I am only saying this in defense of the zoning board. They are trying their best. They are limited by law. And they make some very, very difficult decisions. They are in a bind many times because some of the buildings that are being looked at or projects are grandfathered into the project. That is something that they have no control over. If a particular project involves a grandfather clause, there is nothing that they can do unless they wish to do something wrong. And Mrs. Thompson knows me better than to do anything wrong. As far as I am concerned, these people have done a job. Not a perfect job, but a difficult job. And I would like to commend them for their courage in being popular and unpopular on the front page of the newspaper. But one word of advice, just make sure they spell your name right.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Kraft? Mr. Simeo? Next.
My name is Ken Kraft. I live at 1707 Markham Drive, Bethlehem, PA. I'm on the zoning board, and I am just here to say that I'm in opposition to the majority rule. I feel that you won't get, I think the zoning board works fine the way it is. Hopefully we get up to the 5 members, and I concur with the last speaker that we should have a woman on the board. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Simeo?
My name is Tony Simeo. I reside at 1135 East 3rd Street in Bethlehem, South Side. Bob Fenning couldn't be here today, so I have a message that he wanted to be delivered to the council. Item 10, sub-item G for campaign reports. He is very much for it, as am I. The only issue that we kind of ran into is that signatures are on some of the pages, and with today's society and the way that electronic identity theft can occur and images be manipulated, he would like to ask, and so would I, that those not be included if they are going to be uploaded online. Other than that, it's perfectly fine.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Crowder and Ms. Holland?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Larry Crowder. I live at 727 West Market Street, and I'm currently honored to serve as the chairman of the City of Bethlehem Planning Commission. Talking about bill number 2, again for one moment, 1325.02, I would like to remind the council that the Planning Commission considered this measure at its January 13th meeting and voted unanimously against the supermajority requirement. There were a number of what I will call overarching concerns that I would like you to be aware of as we considered this particular piece of legislation and voted against it. I think the first one that you should be aware of is that we all collectively felt that this would set a bad precedent. And we always have to be concerned, particularly in your shoes, about precedent-setting activities. We just felt that from all boards and commissions that this would set a bad precedent. The mayor, the council, and by extension the citizens, we believe, as members of a commission and appointed members of such a commission, have delegated to us their trust. They've delegated to us the trust to exercise good judgment. And I believe that also means good self-governance. So in this particular case, we were also concerned about, will something like this affect the willingness of good citizens to serve on the boards and commissions, obviously. And again, I had referred to at the meeting as a number of potentially negative but unintended consequences of this type of an action. One of the reasons that the Planning Commission supported 5 zoning hearing board members is based on our good experience that we've had with 5 members of the Planning Commission. And we obviously think that that was appropriate and thoughtful thing to do. However, the issue of effectively requiring almost mandatory attendance, we believe, is inappropriate, and again, goes against the issue of the trust that's delegated and the self-governance that we believe all of your boards and commissions should be allowed to exercise. We don't exercise appropriate self-governance. I think you have the right to deal with that. And I think as you look at things like absenteeism or other problems that might occur on your boards or commissions, those things need to be addressed by the chair. And ultimately, perhaps, if necessary, by the mayor and all of you in seeking the proper people to replace people who are not serving the way that they should. As a result of these, and there were some other opinions offered, some of you have read them, I do not want to be repetitive, but again, I just respectfully request that you vote against this measure. I do agree that it should be monitored, but at this current time, I think the message here is trust, like we all trust you. Thanks.
Thank you. City Controller Holland?
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'm Meg Holland. I live at 2017 Easton Avenue. And the reason I'm here is in your packets tonight, you have 2 versions of the emergency alarm system ordinance. The first version is the one that was presented to the Safety Committee and the Finance Committee back in November by Commissioner Beddoes and I. The second version that you have is the amended or suggested changes that Councilman DiCicento has made to the ordinance. Sergeant Hoffman and I are here to talk about the changes that we want, the articles that we don't want changed, and the ones that we agree with Councilman DiCicento that they should be changed. I'm here for the fee, the annual registration fee. We have in the ordinance that there would be alarm registration fee of $15 for residential alarms and $35 for business alarms. With the present people registered with alarms, over 3,000, that annual fee would generate over $75,000 a year. What that would help do is defray the cost of the officers that are participating in this alarm system. We have a full-time officer that controls the alarm system, answers any false alarms. So it would help with the maintenance and registration of the database, including annual renewals. It would be a comparison of the city registration listings to the listing provided by alarm services providers. Follow up on the discovery of unregistered alarm systems. Ongoing performance by the officer. Consulting services to alarm users. And administrative costs for emergency people that are sent out on false alarms. Those are all tasks that are being performed by one officer, and this revenue generation would defray some of his salary costs. So I object to the change for paragraph 735.11B. And Captain Hoffman has the rest of the things he noted. He signed up.
We'll start the clock. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Sergeant Hoffman?
Yeah, I'm Sergeant Hawken with the Police Department, and I have a number of issues too that in the amendments that I'd like to object to. 735.044 is regarding the alternate key holders, and I believe that the amendment suggested it leaves it too weak. There's no teeth in that requires key holders, responsible key holders, to be able to respond. The key word in the draft is the word capable. That means that a person with an alarm system has to have key holders that are capable of responding. That doesn't mean that if their key holders don't get there in 30 minutes, they're automatically going to be cited because of that. But what it does require is they have people capable. That means that somebody can't live 2 hours away and not be able to get here in 30 minutes. The other issue there is that we want the key holders to be able to shut off the security system. I was on an alarm the other night, Sunday night, on Restaurant Row. There's a store on the first floor, and alarm's going off. You can hear it all the way across the street. Apartments up above it. If you don't have key holders that are, capable and going to respond and be able to shut that alarm off, then it's going to be able to run indefinitely. So I would be against that amendment. There's another one that's a minor one, 735.99B. There's a clause in the first draft. Just mentions that there's other state penalties that may apply. That's simply an indisputable fact, and I think that would be a courtesy to leave that in the ordinance to make alarm users aware of that. Because regardless of whether you take that particular clause out, that's not going to stop anybody, a police officer, from citing an abuser under Title 18. So I think that should stay in there. 735.99 regards the tripling of penalties for people who violate the ordinance after their privileges have been suspended. That's not something that's going to be a penalty or a hardship on compliant users. That's somebody who's violated this ordinance to the point that they've actually had their license or their registration and their privileges suspended, and they're still using an alarm and having it go off, and they're basically thumbing their nose at the people of the city of Bethlehem, their neighbors, and city government. So I believe that should stay in there to put teeth, to get a handle on people that just blatantly would abuse the system. And in support of the comments by Controller Holland, I serve on the city's continual improvement team at the request of the mayor here. And one of the things that we constantly look at is where the city is spending money, but not balancing that with revenue. So if you take away these annual registration fees and the fees that are in the draft, I kind of wonder what's the purpose of even serving on the continual improvement team. That might be a little far-fetched, but that's I think that's important for that to be in there. I know that we have about 3,000 registered alarms in the city, and just by coincidence, and this is not doesn't show any causality or anything, but there also last year in 2010 there were roughly 3,000 false alarms in the city. So it's like a 1-to-1 ratio for registered alarms and false alarms. And I would add to Ms. Holland's comments, the liability that it adds to the city. We did have a fatality a few years ago where a fire truck crashed into a motor vehicle, and there was a fatality from that. That was a false alarm. So I would ask that you leave those things in as far as the fees go. The other recommended amendments as far as, days for doing this or that, I submitted a memo to Attorney Spadoni about that. I have no problem with any of that stuff. But I would recommend against the amendments that I talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shire?
Bill Shire, 1890 Eden Avenue. Before I talk about the supermajority, Bob Fenning, who's residing currently in St. Luke's Hospital, asked me to channel his support for the D. Giacinto amendments on the alarm ordinance, and I would add my own support. And also my concern about, somewhere in there I understand there's a penalty for key holders who do not restore the property, like replacing a broken window in a certain period of time. That should be up to the homeowner. But on to the supermajority. I'm going to disagree with my friend Larry Crowder and my friends of the Zoning Hearing Board. And we are, for the most part, friendly. As a matter of fact, let me say that they do an excellent job, as does the Planning Commission, on public participation. In fact, they are significantly better than this council on that score. I have disagreed with some of the decisions of the Zoning Hearing Board. I hope that anything I have said was not construed to either demean them or question their fairness or integrity. In fact, I question why anyone would put up with the grief that they have to put up with. Certainly not the big bucks that they get, and the Planning Commission doesn't get any bucks. Now, Robert's Rules, and I wish I had done some research on this, does require supermajorities in certain instances. But let me just mention that the city budget requires a supermajority. In fact, if you will, in the terminology we're using tonight, it's a supermajority, because even if one or two members, say, would be absent, and you were voting on a budget item that involved an expense, you would still require 4 votes. And that would be a supermajority, what we're calling tonight. But what you actually do require is 5 votes, even if there were only 5 members present. So that's a supermajority. Now, as to for setting a bad precedent, that reminds me of the old argument that any government regulation is creeping socialism. These things should be done on a case-by-case basis. The Planning Commission does work well without a supermajority. Their attendance record is slightly better than the Zoning Hearing Board, and that's one reason why it works as well as it does. I would argue that for a supermajority there as well. Now, as one Zoning Hearing Board mentioned tonight, sometimes there are conflicts of interest in the Zoning Hearing Board, and they have to recuse themselves. Now, if just one member does that out of 5, which would mean 4 were voting, it still would require 3, so no problem there. The only problem comes up that if 2 have to recuse themselves and or are absent. Well, let me remind you about the basic reason for this change in the first place, the expansion from 3 to 5. In my mind, these decisions are so important sometimes in determining neighborhood quality that I think the implicit assumption has been no 2 people, no matter how far-minded, visionary, integrity, and so on that they are, should have the power to change the character of a neighborhood. And to not require a supermajority is to undermine that concept, because if 2 people are absent, you don't have the supermajority. Again, you're in the position where 2 people can change the character of the neighborhood. Now, we've been told that if people don't like the result of the Zoning Hearing Board, they can appeal it. And that's, of course, that's considerable expense. But I've been at meetings of the Zoning Hearing Board where only 2 members were present. And applicants have been told, because there's only 2 there, they're going to get approval, need approval from both people. And they do have the option of coming back when there's 3. Well, that can also be applied if there's a supermajority. If there's only 3 people there, they can be told, you're going to need 3 people to support you tonight, but you have the option of coming back another time when we have 4 or 5. Or you can amend your play if you lose tonight. you can amend your request sufficiently and come back again. So I think that this is something that should be done, and I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Antalis?
Stephen Antalix, 737 Ridge. Last week I had the pleasure of having dinner with my son in Philadelphia, but I sat silently because he went on and on about the fact that he was having to pay for his burglar and fire alarm. And he made a very interesting case. He felt that fire alarms and burglar alarms are deterrents to either break-ins or quick action on a fire. And he felt that rather than paying for that, the citizens who don't have the alarm should pay or get an alarm installed. And he made some interesting points. By the way, you should be happy he lives in Philadelphia, not in Bethlehem. But anyway, the argument, what I'm saying is that if there is a real fire and the alarm is sounded, the fire department can be there very early and prevent a more serious fire and reduce the amount of time and hours to quell the fire. If there is a break-in, then the police will be there to apprehend. But in most cases, if a burglar has two choices, a house without a burglar alarm sign, one with, which house will he break into? So I think that you have to look at the fundamental reason for burglar alarms and fire alarms. And I think that in the long run, they will do a service to the community by reducing break-ins and reducing the seriousness of a fire. So I feel, as my son feels, that to penalize people for being responsible citizens. And as his argument went on, if you don't have either alarm, you're irresponsible. But that's a stretch. But anyway, he made a good case. So I don't see penalizing citizens for being responsible in the way they live. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Burkett?
Al Burnett, 1004 Johnston Drive. I'd like to make a couple of comments on a couple of the ordinances of tonight. The first thing I'd like to ask for is I'd like council to consider maybe a little change on how they use the 5-minute rule. Because there are some folks that may have things to say that you want to hear more of, and I would ask you to consider if someone would like another 5, if council would like to hear more, that they make a motion and allow.
This is not on the agenda. You could say that the second first. You don't
Okay,
want to take
thank
your
you.
time.
I will say that. So I've already used up 30 seconds of my time on my first 5, okay? That leads me to another point. I am on the clock for 5 minutes. I noticed that Mr. Lupus came up here and spoke for 10 before the clock started. That's true. That's what happened. I don't appreciate that. That is basically the kind of thing that happens in larger situations, okay? It's only 10 seconds, but it's indicative of stretching rules. And that's, one of the reasons I come up here. All right, bill number 2, the majority vote, I think there's been enough eloquently said about that tonight that the only thing I'm going to ask for is that you go ahead and vote for the majority rule. I don't need to expound on that any further. With regard to bill number 8, the campaign finance report, I think that's terrific direction. I would ask that more transparency be provided by the city. I think that basically the website should contain not only the campaign finance report information, but probably the check register for the city of Bethlehem, probably a monthly P&L, probably a list of all the outstanding loans, a list of the principal due, the debt due. Let the people of the city actually see what goes on in the financial heart of the city. So the campaign financial report is a great first step. I think we need to stretch that. Now with regard to, I'm glad that the zoning hearing board came out en masse tonight. I think when you're doing a dimensional variance, it doesn't, there's not a lot of neighborhood impact on a dimensional variance, but some dimensional variances really are tantamount to use variances. And that concerns me, that gives me a problem. Sometimes the zoning hearing case with the Elias Farmers Market makes the front page instead of the Afghan or Iraqi war. And I'll tell you why. Because those people are over there defending the country. I'm just defending my neighborhood. And you know, the zoning hearing board, from my standpoint, backed me into a corner.
Try to keep it on the issue of the.
It's about the majority vote. It's about the zoning board. Okay. They were allowed to speak freely. I noticed that Mr. Thompson came up here and spoke freely. It was all about under the auspices of the majority vote. I'm defending my neighborhood. I follow the law. The genesis of this case, the Elias Farmers Market case, was that the zoning officer said this particular situation is in opposition to a law. He said, no, you cannot do it. Said, no, you cannot do it. And the zoning hearing board went ahead and exceeded their discretion and went ahead and did it. And they messed around in my neighborhood, and that's the problem. That's the problem with me. If you notice some of the commentary supporting or trying to offset the majority rule, extra revenue. Do you think that bias is not in the back of their heads when they're making a decision? Extra revenue for the city. Growth of the economy. They're concerned about their win-loss record. I'm concerned about my win-loss record too. I only have one at-bat with this situation. I want to win, and I'm in the corner, and my teeth are coming out. They're not making me happy. They have 100 decisions a year. I only have one. And it's great that the players want to change the rules, but they are the players. They're not the rule makers. You folks are the rule makers. So however you decide tonight will be okay with me. I'm just happy they come out. And I think one thing that happened from all of this is that literally are listening. I mean, they came to a city council meeting, not that they haven't been here before, but somebody has their attention about the decisions they make and how they impact neighborhoods. And I don't believe the majority rule is going to impact residents coming and volunteering for service. I think there should be an open nomination situation. All the nominations come out of the mayor's office. I think that the mayor ought to open the nominations up blatantly on the website, invite people to apply for these various boards. And there will also be the objectives. Well, I'll get into that another one at the later courtesy of the floor. But my 5 minutes is up, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? Gentlemen here on the agenda, then we'll move to our regular agenda.
Ron Lewis, 1516 Lebanon Place in Bethlehem. I'm also the alternate member of the zoning hearing board. I was going to sit back and because most of my fellow people have said pretty much everything there is to say that we need to say, except I might as well say my piece too now, and which is the fact that I'm in favor of the 5 members, but against the supermajority. The other thing I'd like to point out is that, and I know there's a lot of stuff been said about the things that we do and how we deliberate and all that kind of stuff, but I want to point out one thing. These 5 guys, we take this job seriously. We do listen to all the testimony, we deliberate amongst ourselves, and we think about the laws that we're dealt with as far as the ordinances that we have, the evidence that's presented to us, both from the applicant and also from the objectors, if there is evidence that they present. We look at everything before we actually make our decisions on any of the stuff that we do. I think the record speaks for itself as far as everything that we've dealt with. I want to also point out that what we're dealing with, you got to remember, is very old ordinances. What you guys need to do is to pass this new comprehensive plan, which will then put the new ordinances into effect. It's very difficult when you're working with antiquated ordinances, and you've got to make the decisions that we make. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Council will move into its agenda. Item 6, old business. Members of council, old business. Move into communications. Communications, 7A, President of Council, proposed ordinance, campaign finance reports.
Attached is an ordinance that the President of Council is proposing in the spirit of transparency, requiring that copies of campaign finance reports for candidates running for the offices of City Council, Mayor, City Controller, and City Treasurer be filed with the City Clerk's office before or on the due date. The candidates must file with the County of Northampton as mandated by state law, and that such reports be posted on the city's website no later than 5 working days after the due date. The proposal is to list the contributions and expenditures and will not set any limits on contributions as had been discussed in